Hi, and welcome back to HomeShop. Today we've got a KitchenAid K45 mixer by Hobart Manufacturing that's not working right. We've got an issue with the speed control. It's just off or full blast and nothing in between. And it's also got a pretty awful noise coming from somewhere around here. So we're going to tear this apart and see if we can get down to what's causing these issues and see if we can fix them. Before we get into that, just a little disclaimer, I am not an electrical engineer or an electrician. So this should not be construed as advice in any way. If you blow up your mixer trying to do what I'm about to do, that's on you, not me. I don't know if we can find parts for this, so we may have to jerry-rig something, and I don't want anybody out there wrecking things based on something that I may do that might be dumb. We'll see how this goes. Let's get into it. Just to be upfront about everything, I did open this up already once. So before I even brought it home, I was looking at some things to try to see what was going on with it, and it has some nasty sounds. And as you can see right here, the big issue is that the speed is the same no matter what speed setting you set it to. So as you move that selector switch, it's supposed to be starting off slow and then getting faster as you go, and that was not happening. So when I opened it up earlier, I opened up the upper housing there and just checked all the mechanics on the inside real quick, just visually, and I didn't see anything that was broken. The noise that you hear, I'm pretty sure is coming from that shaft on the bottom, because when I had to dismantle the top, in order to get the top off, you have to take the orbital off, so that part that spins on the bottom actually comes straight out the bottom, and you'll see that a little bit later here when I open that up. But when I took it off in testing before I brought this home, that sound went away when I was running it without the orbital and shaft attached to it on the bottom. So I don't think that is a sound that's coming from the motor itself. That's a sound that's coming from, I think that shaft just needs to be greased up or lubed up. So we're going to be able to get at the components that control the speed through this housing on the back. We don't actually have to take apart the whole upper housing like you do to get to the motor to adjust the speed. It's just this one screw here on top, and then this back plate will come off. And then right there, that board that is all the way at the back end there, that is the speed control board. This cardboard thing on the top here, that's a capacitor. That's another thing to check, but I don't think that's what's bad because it's not arcing. And from what I've read, the arcing is what you would notice if the capacitor itself was the issue. I apologize for the focus on this. I'm just realizing now that it wasn't quite focused on the right spot when I was taking this off here. So looking on the bottom here, what I'm looking at is I'm inspecting the distance between the bottom of that plate and a bar that connects to the selector switch on the side. As you move that selector switch, the bar makes contact with the bottom of that plate and pushes it in and out. And then there's these two screws at the top that are adjustment screws that allow you to make that plate move in and out to adjust the distance to that bar. This thing was way, way, way too loose, at least from what I can tell. Again, I'm not an expert on this. I've read some things about these mixers, and what I can tell you is, looking at that with that flashlight, when you move the selector switch on the side, it was not making contact at all with the speed plate, so much so that the plate wasn't even moving when you would move the selector switch in and out like that. And I think that has a lot to do with why the motor wasn't changing speed. The speed control board just wasn't even getting any input from the selector switch. I don't know if somebody got in here at some other time and tried to make some adjustments and just made it way too loose, or if it just backed those screws out over time from use, but those were way too loose. So tightening them up here I think is at least on the way to making it work better. Alright, so we are starting to see some change in speed on the top two notches here with the selector switch, but it's really minor. So the adjusting of those screws has made a little bit of a difference, but not a whole lot. Overall, those bottom four notches on that speed selector switch really still aren't doing anything at all. If we get up close here and take a look, you can see kind of the workings of the push bar on the bottom. As I move this selector switch, you see that kind of getting closer, and there now it's making contact with that adjustment screw on the bottom, which you can see is already maxed out. So it's screwed in all the way, and it's still not making any kind of contact for those first four notches. It takes several clicks before that bar makes contact with that adjustment screw on the bottom and starts pushing that plate out. Now I haven't really showed you how that plate works yet, so we're going to have to get a different angle here so you can see what that's actually doing. Basically, it's supposed to be making contact with that bar, and as the motor spins, there's a governor that is actually making contact with that metal T-bar that you see in the center of that plate. And as that plate gets pushed out, it allows the governor to spin more freely and to stretch out, which then allows the motor to go faster. That T-bar is also changing the amount of electricity that's going to the motor by making contact or not with that T-bar across the center. So it's either sending electricity through the capacitor and slowing down the amount of electricity or reducing the amount of electricity that's going to the motor, or when it gets pushed out, that T-bar actually touches two metal contacts on either side and shorts out the capacitor, allowing full electricity to flow straight into the motor. So you can see here the governor spinning, and that is what's controlling the speed, the actual speed of the motor. So what we need to do is figure out how we can get this speed control plate to go in farther, or at least start in farther, so that it's making contact with that bar sooner and actually has some adjustment in those first couple clicks, because right now it's not even making any contact until you've already turned that switch to the fourth notch. So I'm going to take this screw out that's in here, this adjustment screw, and I have this idea. I think maybe if I just get a longer screw, I know that's not factory anymore. We're getting into changing parts out that make it something it wasn't originally, but I don't know what else I'm going to do. You're not going to find replacement parts that are new anymore for this. I actually think the faulty part here might actually be the governor. I'm not an expert, so I don't know for sure, but I feel like potentially the springs in that might be worn out and are not giving the governor itself enough resistance. I feel like it might be putting too much pressure on that plate too early in its spinning, and maybe that's what's causing it to move without the bar even coming in contact with it. We'll try the screw method here and we'll just see if this helps. I don't think I can get a new governor for this. I know I've seen on eBay you can buy parts taken out of other mixers, but if I put an old one from another mixer in, I don't know how much better that's going to be. So I'm thinking here this might be a fix that might make this still work. Okay, and I have quickly realized that I made a mistake here. So, yes, this screw is allowing me to make contact with the bar even from the off position. I can touch the bar to the contact surface for the speed plate now, but the problem is as soon as you turn it on, that governor starts moving out and it starts pushing the speed plate out without touching the bar that goes to the controls on the side. So that governor is actually, I think, the issue here. You kind of see that a little bit better here. So you saw that plate move instantly when I turned on the motor. But that's not moving because of the controller on the side moving it. That's moving because the governor starts to spin and move outward without even making contact with the bar on the bottom. Once again, we do have some speed adjustment here that we didn't have before, so it's better. Again, it's better than it was in our last attempt here. But it's still not giving me all of those notches, all of the adjustment on the side of this mixer. So I'm still down to, I think it's the last 2 notches are still not giving me any change in speed. We're not getting down to that lowest speed range yet on this motor. And it's just because that speed plate is not starting in the position of all the way in. It's still sitting too far out. And you can see that demonstrated here. If I push in on that speed plate manually, you can see how slow it gets. And this is what it should be on setting number 1. And as soon as I let go, that governor just pushes that speed plate out, and it's not making contact with the selector switch bar on the side at all anymore. It just is getting pushed out by that governor that wants to move to the rear. So we're gonna have to see if we can do something different here. You can see the governor here marked as number 29 in this diagram. This is something I pulled offline. It's not the diagram for this specific model of mixer. It is still a K45, but it's the modern version. So it has replaced, over the years, they replaced the speed board that I'm playing with a solid state system, which is what's shown here in this diagram. Generally though, everything is in the same location. It's mostly the same parts. So you can see here at least kind of how this is all laid out. I might come back at some time in the future if I can find the appropriate part that is in good working order. I might try and just come in and replace the governor. But for now, we're gonna have to see if we can maybe jerry-rig something. So my thought is, since the issue seems to be that board won't stay pushed in, or that it's getting pulled out or pushed out by the offending governor, maybe I can use a spring to keep that board, or to add some additional pressure to the other side of that board that will maybe help counteract that governor a little bit, but still allow the board to move and function as it should. Found a spring that looks like it's not too stiff, and I've got these little plastic cups, and I think I can maybe stick one of those cups backwards on the adjustment screw that's on the bottom, and that'll help hold the spring in place and keep it from flopping around. After that, I'm just gonna have to figure out how to keep the other end of the spring in place, and so it's not sliding all over the place against the housing. So we'll just have to experiment with this a little bit and see what we can do. I'm going to go back to the original adjustment screw on the bottom here. There's no sense in putting an extra long screw on there and potentially running into the housing and making it a cramped space. And it's not an original part anyway, so since that didn't fix the thing, I'm just going to go back to that original adjustment screw and then attach this cup to it. And we're going to need a washer, I think, because the hole in that cup is just a little bit too big. I thought that was going to fit, but it pops right through, so we're going to have to add a washer here to keep that screw from falling through the hole in the center when we screw it in. So there we have the washer seated inside that plastic cup. Just pushing it down there nice and tight, and then we'll get it screwed back in, and hopefully we'll be rocking. And install the spring here. Give it a good test fit. Seems like it's going to hold it in place. It's always good to check tolerances, so put the that cover on and just make sure that the spring isn't going to be too long, or figure out where the end of the spring really needs to be. And what we find is that the cardboard there is right flush with the end of where the cover sits. By applying a little bit of pressure to the spring, we can make sure that it's exactly the right length for the spring at its full extension to be giving just the right amount of pressure to keep that plate pushed in all the way, and then still have enough travel for that bar to push the plate to the rear all the way for full function of the speed control. Here we're going to test it out, and let's see. Turning it on, we've got low speed and moving up through the speeds. Alright, so we've identified a problem here. The spring is working, but we're not getting anything on the bottom to speeds again. Now it's just starting out at the lowest speed because it's being pushed in all the way, and it's not really moving until you get to like the third notch. So it's keeping it at that low speed even though we're moving the selector. So I think the answer is actually going to be, as funny as it is, going back to that longer screw that I just pulled out and maybe cutting it down to size so that it's not as long as it is currently, but is a little bit longer than the regular bolt that comes with this mixer, because what's happening here is the added little plastic cup and the washer are actually keeping the screw head from being screwed in all the way. So we've actually lost, that looks like maybe 2-3 millimeters of travel on that screw. So it's actually backed it out to the point where it's no longer making contact with that bar attached to the selector switch on the side anymore, again for that first 1 or 2 notches on the speed selection. So we're going to cut this screw down so it's just a little bit longer than the one that was originally in the mixer. Hopefully with this trim job here, it's going to be basically the length of the screw if we didn't have that piece on there, so that it has the same travel as it is supposed to. Alright, testing it again, and now you can see the plate is moving with every selection Every time that bar moves on the side now, it is moving the speed plate in the back. So we have all of the different speeds now functioning. It's time to try to put this thing back together again. Alright, just to make sure this spring doesn't go flopping around or fall out of this cup when I'm trying to put the end plate back on or come off in the middle of running, we're going to use a little bit of electrical tape and just kind of encapsulate this spring and wrap it around that cup a little bit to provide a little bit more side-to-side control over the spring and where it moves. Just kind of hold it in place a little bit better. It's not going to slide out of that cup from just forward and backward movement, but just to be extra safe, we're going to just add a little bit extra insurance here. I'm also going to bend the end of the spring here so that it is going around that cardboard that sticks out the bottom there to give it something to hold on to. So when I'm putting the back plate on, it's not going to be pushing it out of the way or making it go side to side. It should keep it nice and lined up. Just put that last single screw back in, and then we're going to spin this thing around and see if we can lubricate the planetary so that it stops making that awful noise. The way this works, it's got a pin. There's one pin that runs through the planetary and into the main drive shaft above. So you got to knock that pin out with some kind of a punch. It pops through the other side, then you can usually wiggle it loose, or in my case it was still a little stuck, so my punch helps to use the right tools. That's not a punch you would want to really use for this. That's a punch made for putting a nail deeper into some wood, and so it isn't the same thickness all the way through, so I had to find something else. Thankfully the pin was almost all the way out. You wouldn't want to be beating on your screwdriver to do this normally, but since it was already pretty loose, it didn't do any damage to my tools. Now you're going to probably want to use some kind of a screwdriver or pry bar or something. That planetary is on there pretty good even after you take the pin out, so you're going to have to pry it down a little bit, but it should slide right down. And what you'll find on the inside is a set of gears. There's one that kind of rotates around a larger gear that is part of the case, and it all hooks onto that center shaft there that's going up to the motor. So you can see in there is a little bit of grease on the gear, but the rest of it seems pretty dry, and I think the part that's making the noise, you can hear as I'm turning this here, the part that's making the noise is actually where the shaft is running through that part of the housing. It's not the gears that are making the noise, it's actually the shaft itself. So we're going to have to get something down in there that can lubricate the shaft inside the housing. We're just going to use some WD-40 here for now. I know that is probably not the best lubricant for something like this, but it's on hand and it will probably do the job. So we're going to give that a shot and see if that makes a difference. Just squirt some right up near the top there and let it work its way down into the housing. I'm not hearing the squeaks anymore when I spin it by hand, so that noise that I was hearing when I took it apart at the start is gone, and I'm going to say that's probably a good sign. Planetary slides back up onto the main shaft and it gets secured with that pin again, and then it's just a matter of adding that circular metal cover over the bolts around the planetary, and we're ready to go. We'll give this thing a shot and see what it sounds like and check its speed.
All right, well, I'd probably call this a success, although it's not back to full working order, I suppose, because we had to add parts that weren't part of the original design. Now, I don't know if you want to call that improving on the design or maybe just making do, but in either case, it is running again, and that means we're going to be putting this back to use, making bread and all kinds of other things. We might come back to this in the future if we can find the correct parts to make this thing work the way it was intended. But for now, we know that at least we've got speed control back and it's not making noises anymore. So it seems to be nice and smooth, and we'll get it back into use. Thanks for watching. If something happens and this thing lights on fire, I'll probably just delete this video and you won't have to worry about it. But until next time, have a nice day. See ya.